take it away. All right, there you go.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Welcome. My name is Nora Jackson. I'm a resiliency planner here for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and I'm going to be talking about our rain gauge platform, how the project came about. We're going to go through a short demonstration and go through some of the different features of the platform and the dashboard, and then close out with some of the next steps and things that we'd like to do with it. And then also we're going to have some time for some Q&A and playing around live on the dashboard kind of during your questions. So that should be fun to kind of close everything out.
And I'll just hop in really briefly with some housekeeping rules around the webinar. So today's Zoom is in a webinar format. So to involve as many of you as possible for discussion and questions, we do ask that you put any questions into the Q&A box during the presentation, and we'll be sure to take plenty of time at the end to respond. And if you would like to be taken off mute at that point, you can raise your hand or put that in the chat as well. You can put additional comments within the chat, and it would also be great if everybody could add their name and affiliation so we can all see who's joining us today. But again, because this does get pretty condensed in the chat, just be sure to put any questions in the Q&A box. As you've likely noted, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded to NVRC's YouTube page, as well as our resilience page on our NOVA region website after the event.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Appreciate you taking care of all the housekeeping for us, and we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started. So I'm going to start off a little bit with a bit of background on the Northern Virginia Regional Commission and kind of where this project came from. And so historically, the commission has served as a technical resource for all of the local governments here in Northern Virginia. And so that could be developing products, like structural and non-structural guidance, like the original BMP handbook, or managing different cooperative watershed programs like 4 Mile Run, Occoquan Monitoring Lab, essentially providing a variety of services and support across a different variety of subject areas, but mostly serving as a mechanism for regional coordination, especially when it comes to responding to a lot of shared problems and issues that arise, like flooding, especially because of extreme rain events. And so that's something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with all across Virginia is becoming a problem. And we are no strangers to it up here in Northern Virginia, especially given all of the roads, all of the impervious surface up here. There's not a lot of places for the water to go. And so it really started to ramp up, and a lot of folks became concerned who worked in our jurisdictions and really wanted to talk about how we could kind of address this at a regional level. And so that really led to a discussion about all of these like floods and flash floods that have been happening, working with the local coordinators, floodplain managers, public works staff, engineers, anyone who works with planning for floods or responding to floods in the region. And so we actually learned that a couple of our local governments were all using the same equipment and the same company and platform to install their own rainfall runoff monitoring systems. And so this is for some of our larger jurisdictions, County of Fairfax, Prince William County, as well as the city of Alexandria. And so, like I said, those rainfall runoff monitoring systems means that they're putting in a lot of rain gauges, which is really fantastic. But all of these jurisdictions are neighbors, and they did not know that they were using the same equipment, the same companies, and so they couldn't even share data because they had no idea that was happening. And what's really interesting is that, when this project first started, we only had those 3 jurisdictions, but by the time the project is launched, we'll actually have another jurisdiction join the County of Arlington as well. So this was really an opportunity for us to look at improving the data sharing between the localities to help educate the general public about changing climate conditions and the new flood hazards that are happening and what it's bringing into Northern Virginia. And so Alexandria had actually already made their rain gauge and runoff network public. And so we took that idea and we said, wouldn't it be great if we showed everyone? So we wanted to, kind of build off of that platform, bring in everyone else for the region. under one umbrella. But there were some folks who were a little bit hesitant to make that information public, which is understandable. This is a lot of folks who are looking at it from the emergency management and response side. Traditionally information on, location of like dams, not usually shared, usually concerns about vandalism, and sometimes just explaining to your typical Joe homeowner who saw an error on a station, what it actually means. And you spend like taking an hour on the phone, kind of going through it. And my goal was to lessen their workload, not to add to it. So at this point, we decided that it would be really cool if we could just find a way to integrate the network that would help improve the data sharing amongst the jurisdictions, so that everyone could have access to this really valuable information and data. So I applied for funding through the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. This was in the fall of 2021. And I would also like to point out that this was around the same time that this position was actually created at the commission specifically. And so I'd recently started and joined in. And so jumping in with both feet first. And throughout this process, we learned that a couple of the hardware and software platforms that were originally individually operated were acquired by one company. And so this is going to become a little bit important later as it comes to building our platform eventually. So now that all of those, that hardware and that software is available under one umbrella, and we did receive some CFPF funds, but it wasn't as much as we expected. It was a little over 10K. It's not as much as I asked for. And so another opportunity came through with congressional appropriations through our senators, Warner and Kaine, the state office, which was fantastic because I was able to request funds to essentially finish the originally proposed project of, integrating the network and building a platform to help data sharing amongst our jurisdictions. And so once that money came through, it is coming from NOAA's office. So I did have to wait for the official award and contract to come through from the agency, and not just the notice that it was awarded from our senators. So that took a little bit of time. But then we also had to kind of go back and reset and think again about how we were going to use those CFPF funds. And now that we had that money, we're going to call it the CDS money. Moving forward, again, apologize for all the acronyms. But once we had that CDS money, I was like, well, how do we leverage the original funds to put us in a position to use the other ones the best possible way? What's possible for this company AEM to even do with the $10,000? And ultimately, we decided that they could do an audit and a report on all of the systems in the region. So we could kind of go through and look at what equipment is active, who owns it, what it does, and then also where the network could be improved by adding more sensors. And so this is important for the timeline. A couple years have passed at this point, and Arlington has now come online, with a couple of their sensors and starting to get involved in the process. And it took AEM a while. We were able to request an extension for the CDS funds, but we did eventually get the audit completed, which was fantastic. And then we also, at the same time, they ended up launching a platform called Elements 360, which is a new multi-hazard integrated platform. And this is actually what we're going to be using for NOAA Flood Map. And so we worked with each of our jurisdictions to develop a new scope of work for how to spend that CDS money, which was integrating the network. And we do have it broken out for some contractual work, so that's like the web development, but also for some equipment to actually improve the network by either adding new sensors or updating the network by replacing older ones. And so we started working on that new scope. And originally, like I said, folks were not really interested in having it be public, but that's exactly what they turned around and said they did want this time around. And so we were able to work with all of our jurisdictions. They were excited about getting this information public. Again, just rain gauges, a little sensitive when it comes to stage and dam gauges, but we needed to come up with a data sharing agreement if we were all going to have everyone's data on one platform. And I was like, oh boy, something else is going to take a really long time. But we were luckily able to leverage an existing data sharing agreement through our partners at the Metropolitan Washington Coalition of Governments. All of our localities are already members. They've already signed. And so we were able to develop an addendum for their MOU. and have their lawyers review it and have the CAOs approve it. But again, that was another longer bit of the process, so that didn't really happen until November or so. And so now that we have that agreement, it has been certified, we can start working on building the actual platform. And so that was when AEM started working on putting together all of those different servers and building that platform for us. So that was around December and January. And by the end of February, I received the administrator login and information to start managing it myself. And a little short, 2-hour training on basically some of the basic functionality, how to build dashboards. There's a lot to it, but it really was just kind of a scratching the surface in general about what the platform does. And so that was a really critical part. And then I spent several days and several hours grinding away trying to get it ready so that we could release it at the same time as some of our other regional flood hazard messaging, because this was also just happened to coincide with Flood Awareness Week. And so we are working with our region to kind of collectively release regional messaging around this. And I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to incorporate it with some of our events and push out that messaging as well. Which is really great because we got, I think, over 3,800 visits to the site in the first 30 days that it's been out. And more than half of that came from the first week during Flood Awareness Week. All right, so that's how the project came about. I built the dashboard, I built the platform, that's where we're here. Feel free to scan that QR code there and you can pop it up on your phone. You can also feel free to look it up, NOAA Flood Map, and kind of follow along on your own if you'd like. But we are going to be moving into the demonstration portion of the webinar here. And so I do have a recording that I'm going to show, and then I'm going to talk through basically all of the features that I'm showing in the recording. After that, just a couple of short slides again on some of the next steps that we're going to be doing. And then I'm really excited because there actually is rain coming in today that we can see from the edge of the radar. So the recording I made yesterday afternoon, unfortunately, there was no rain coming in. So you kind of get to see a little bit of both sides there after that. So we are going to go ahead and get moving here, and I'm going to start on our demonstration. This is the homepage, like I said, NOAA Flood Map. And kind of just introduce it about the purpose of the platform. It really was to provide open access to everyone to near real-time precipitation data, because guess what? These gauges report every 5 minutes. So we're getting really, really detailed and really accurate measurements of how much rain is falling where. And so there's a couple of different features in here on the homepage. We do go into a little bit of explanation about the changing precipitation patterns in NOVA. And then, of course, you can see just a little inset of one of the rainfall increment maps that you can look at, which is seeing how much rain has been logged in the past 24 hours. Again, you could see this was yesterday afternoon. Obviously, no rain is logged. Showing over here the additional resources, just a drop down there to show a couple of options. The rainfall maps drop down is just going to take you directly to our map page, and it's going to automatically show you whichever one of those increments that you'd like. And so that'll just open a new tab there for you. And so that's, like I said, it does report every 5 minutes, but that's what allows us to get all of those detailed increments in there as well. And up at the top, I do want to point out that kind of like profile image there. So you'll notice that you're logged in as a guest. I'm showing the guest view right now, not my own login administrator view. So that's how I'm able to tell how many people come in. It actually is, there is a password associated with it, and we just have it set up open and automated programming as everyone logs in to the platform. And so I think one of the first things I'm going to show you guys is our map. And so this is going to take us to see all of the different sites that have all of the sensors for the region. On the right-hand side is kind of where you're going to have all of your navigation. So you're going to look at, you have views, sites, sensors, base maps, and layers. We're going to start looking at kind of the different views for the gauges. So you can look at it as the list of all of the sites, but if you open the drop down, it can also show you by source. So because we're getting some of these in from the cities themselves, but we're also bringing some in from federal agencies that's open data like USGS. So clicking on one of them, Fairfax County, it zooms in, it shows me, I go back out, I look at all of the sites. I think it's something that's important to talk about is the legend here. And so that green is obviously showing all of the sensors that are operational at the moment. We do not have any that are out of service. But that timeout sensor or that timeout in the legend is just showing that there hasn't been anything recorded recently and reported back. And so it could mean that it's just been a long time that since it's rained, there could be an issue with the tipping bucket. A lot of times there's a bird's nest or there might be debris in it. And so that's usually what that means. The unacknowledged alarm and acknowledged alarms are not a capability that we are going to be working with, but that is something that our local governments do use. They can build thresholds for rain or flow and built in so that a text message or email gets sent out to a specific group, when that level is breached, and then that person can acknowledge it. This is our list of sites. So I'm going to specify here. We'll do a quick, you can see the names. It's a little messy, so we're gonna turn that off, but you can look at it by name if you need to find it. And it's just gonna show, the ones that are timed out, and it's just gonna show all of them by name and list. And again, these sites have multiple sensors. This is just one station is how I think of it. And so if you look at the list of all of our sensors, this is the different types that we have incorporated into the map. We really focused on rain, but there are some other data that are available, like air temperature and things like that. So you can change and look at, we're gonna look at air temperature briefly, just so you can see that. And again, with the thresholds, that's not something that we're working with now. But you can see rain increment, again, 15 minutes. This was yesterday afternoon. There was no reported. And because we have not defined any thresholds, nothing is going to pop up for us there. And now I want to go back because I want to look at all of the sensors again. This next one is pretty simple and intuitive. This is just how you change your base map. But this additional layers option is really interesting. So AEM put in a bunch of these because they're already, just available publicly. And so it's some time controls. So I think you get about like an hour or so, a previous hour of constant mosaic data. So I'm going to look at current observations. So wind speed, for example, I'll just note that little flag there at the bottom is how you turn on the legend, which is quite small. But that's how you're going to look at the legend for whatever data it is that you toggled on to view. But like I said, that's the time controls option. There's a lot of different layers in here that have been ingested. And we're going to turn that off so I don't have the time controls blocking the map for my other views. But we're going to dive deep into one of these specific sites. And so I am going to look at 4 Mile Run, which is in Alexandria. And so this site actually has 2 sensors at it. So it has our rain gauge as well as a stage sensor. And so we can look at both of these when you click on that individual site. And then I'm going to roll over here and see that is going to show you a bar graph. If it had rained, there would be levels in there. And we're going to go back, or that drop down. Again, that's just another view. We don't have anything like images or notes or thresholds associated with this station yet, like I said. So we can go back to the graph. We have the sensor. Let's check out the stage. That's pretty cool. So it has some of the National Weather Service flooding thresholds there, as well as the current stage. And again, it's got that same drop down, but we don't have any images or notes associated with that yet. So that is that specific site, and that icon, you can click on that, and that's going to bring you out to a new page that shows the sensors for that site and the information for that specific site. So you can see, again, this is yesterday. It's showing you the rain increment and your stage. sure we're still going. All right. We're going to look at the rain increment one first. And another way to see that is to go back to the sensor. You can click on it. That's your sensor icon. When you click on that sensor, it brings you to that gauge, right? So again, multiple sensors at each site. So it hasn't rained recently. It's kind of showing me, the last week or so. I'm scrolling down. And then this is also where you're showing the data logs from every 5 minutes. This is where you can download the data. Pretty simple, pretty easy and straightforward, just tabular CSV. And let's go back up here and take a look at some days where it actually did rain a little bit earlier in the month to kind of see what that looks like. And so this is just showing the rain increments that we have measured at a daily rate. So you can see kind of the 11th there is kind of when we got the most, a little over an inch. But I can also break down this bin size to look at, at a much shorter increments, right? So this is how much rain is actually falling every 5 minutes. And so this is a really cool way to look at the distribution of rainfall, especially because we know that there is so much variability. This is just really helpful in visualizing because you can roll over and it'll show you exactly those recordings and the time that it was done at those different increments. And that is your markers in the top left-hand corner there. We're going to go now to the stage gauge because now that you have an idea of what the rain increment looks like, we kind of want to think about what that looks like at the response side. So this is kind of the runoff part of our rainfall runoff monitoring systems, right? And so this is showing the stage information for that site 4-mile run. It's showing the thresholds for, major, moderate, and minor and action stage of the National Weather Service for floods. And then that is going to be your current stage gauge information right there. As you hover over it, it will tell you. And that's something else you can go turn on in the markers as well to give you that additional information. And so this is what I think is really interesting, or what is going to provide the best information for us when we do add some more of these stage gauges, is to look at that really in-depth small time increment changes of how much rain fell, where, and what the response looks like. So this is kind of just really zooming in on the y-axis there to look at the stage and the kind of the changes that it had made over the course of those storms for the past week, and that's without rainfall, right? We're just looking at the last 7 days. So let's change it and look at what the rainfall looked like from the rain gauges that we just looked at. This is the beginning of the month, right? We said that kind of April 11th time frame, or even back in April 7th. It didn't, like we said, it didn't rain that much, maybe, right? It was a little over an inch, but it already peaked, almost to an action stage there. And another way to look at it is if you are able to bring it down a little bit in scale, right? So I think I make a short mistake here, but we go through and we look at, let's just look at that, that one rain event really, and kind of look at that stage and the changes and how quickly the rise is and where the fall is. And so by turning off the thresholds, again, that zooms in on that y-axis there, so you can really look at the difference kind of in the stage as it makes its rise during the storm. No, and it wasn't 24 hours worth of 1 inch of rain, it was over a shorter period of time, and so that is a lot of times what we are noticing is that we are getting a lot of rain that is falling over much shorter periods of time. But this is where our localities can use the alarm options. So again, this is where you can download all of that data, again, recording every 5 minutes. But they can set thresholds here so that there are alarms or notifications get sent to the right folks who need to respond to an event should a rain gauge or even a stage gauge reach a certain level. And so, because we know that when X amount of rain falls in this certain area, that we theoretically expect, the 100-year flood to happen, right? And so there's a lot of design criteria in the region that kind of goes all across that. And I'll pause it real quickly. So and go back. Almost missed the transition. Started talking too much. So on the dashboard side here, this is the public facing one. So this is the one that I think makes a little bit more sense for normal like layperson. It's still a little bit more technical in nature, but like I said, this dashboard, this platform, Elements 360, is like a multi-hazard integration decision-making software. So it's not really designed for like just regular public viewing. It really is for hazard management. From like a local government side. But the dashboard is really great and we can make many more of these. But we wanted to focus on making one that was just specific to, the rain gauges and kind of showing how much rain is happening in the region and helping to tell that story. So this is our dashboard. And this is, again, this is yesterday. So unfortunately, we're not looking at any radar right now. But it just kind of shows you, it's got your basic stages, all of the gauges there. You have all of the options and same functionality that you had on the map to change your views and to do all of the same things, the same pop-ups as well. When you click on each individual station, I can again search for 4 Mile Run and look at that station, change it, click on the sensor icon, and navigate from there. And scrolling down a little bit, we built in a couple of different options for these tiles here. And so it's kind of a general weather page, right? So we have National Weather Service watches and warnings input here. I'm showing some of the air temperature gauges, the National Weather Service weather story. And so those kind of automatically update periodically. And those are really nice because those were already built into the platform. This is not like an Esri dashboard. It's not super intuitive or easy to use. It's a little bit more heavy on the web developer side. So some of those built-in options were really useful and helpful for us because I think it helps kind of keep everything nice and tidy because like I said, we can do this we can make different dashboards looking at different aspects and kind of summarizing this data in different ways. So each of these tiles is showing one gauge from each of our jurisdictions that have the AEM platform. And so we were able to show it every 5 minutes. So these tiles are actually coded to update whenever a gauge reports rainfall. So the stations may change. Like I said, rainfall hasn't been recorded recently, but as soon as rainfall gets recorded, you'll also see that tile change in color. So that's also something you can build into the dashboard is different thresholds and levels to kind of visually notify when those changes and things like that, thresholds are happening. And then on the site side, I'm going to show that we can zoom out a little bit, I think, at this point, because I was looking for some radar because I was hoping that a storm might be coming in. And you can usually see it. So that's something that you will see when you go to the dashboard page automatically. And I was like, nope, no rain. And I guess we're not getting any. But then luckily I checked the weather for today and I was like, yes, we have a little bit. So hopefully that'll be neat to kind of see that in just a minute. That's a pretty easy one. That's just telling you to, what method, when you want it to update, basically. All right. And I think that brings it to the end of that kind of like basic intro demo to some of the features. Again, I feel like we're like a month and a half maybe into me learning the platform and kind of navigating and playing around with it. I feel like I'm learning something new every day. And also working with some of our local partners as well who've been using it for a little bit longer than I have, to see what they're using it for, and learn a little bit more about it. So some of the things that I wanted to talk about next are, what do we want to do with it, right? So now that we have the platform, we do actually have it for 5 years. So we do have a lot of time to kind of go through and look at some different options and ways that we can either improve the whole network, cost savings. There's a lot of things that we want to do with it. And the first thing I wanted to mention is the data exchange outputs option. So our server basically is built by having all of these data inputs and data bridges coming from our localities, coming from USGS, but I can also build, they have a data exchange API to do outputs so that we can basically stream that data. It's HTTP based, to stream that data to another software platform and something like that. And so it provides a web-based service to exchange that near real-time data. And then another thing that we want to do again is add that runoff component. So adding the stage gauges. I didn't want to bite off too much at one time. And also given the hesitancy around some of the information, to start slow and kind of now that we have proof of concept, you can add some of those stage gauges and sticking with the ones that are kind of only available publicly on USGS websites. And something else we want to do is make more of those dashboards, right? So like I showed you the rain gauge dashboard that kind of had your general weather information. We can make different dashboards and they could be organized by locality or watershed, or any other type of frame that you'd kind of like to look at that information. We also do have money that is technically allocated to purchase additional monitoring equipment. So if you are a NOAA locality and you would like some, please get in touch with me. That is a caveat if we can still work on successfully drawing down the award given our current federal agency climate. But that's an example of a High Sierra Electronics tipping bucket rain gauge right there on the right. But one of the things that I think most excited about is the option for regional gauge adjusted radar rainfall, which is a really interesting product that's already being purchased by a lot of our individual jurisdictions. And so we want to look at an opportunity to produce something at a regional scale, not just for them, right? And so GAR is really taking radar and rain gauge data and combining it and processing it to come up with a much more accurate distribution of rainfall. And that's giving you also 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid cells, which is the equivalent to having a rain gauge every square kilometer. So it also helps when, ideally we would want a network that dense, but that's, feasibly, financially not going to happen, right? And so this is kind of our best option for filling in gaps in a network and processing it. And so they can really use it for a lot of different purposes. People are using it to prove compliance with different stormwater requirements, using it for predictive flood modeling, H&H models for reservoir management. You can use it to even verify how well an existing network is performing, and using it particularly for post-event analysis. So this is also something I'm really interested in doing because this can help with damage estimations after an event. And again, help us look at how much rain is falling where and what that really looks like when it comes to the flooding that we're seeing in our region after the fact. And some of our long-term plans, we're really hoping that this helps in general with sensor management and reporting, again, improving that, and also calibrating some models and doing some ground truthing when it comes to a lot of our flood and stormwater models. Long-term network planning, again, this is going to help with allocation of funds. Where do we need equipment? Where is enough data already being collected? Where can cost savings, where can that be enter the equation, especially as a regional entity, potentially purchasing more at a larger scale. Again, that regional GAR product, the gauge adjusted radar rainfall, is something that can be shown on our platform specifically. But one of the most important things that everyone talks about when we talk about rain gauges is maintenance. And so when it comes to maintenance, we need funding for it, we need training for it, we need coordination, because this is still a relatively new endeavor and kind of new world that I feel like our localities are kind of getting into. And so maintenance was very difficult in the beginning because there weren't a lot of people who were trained or able to do the maintenance, and they need a lot of attention. And so by doing this at a regional scale, we hope that we can kind of support one of the biggest gaps and asks that our localities have when it comes to these networks, which is maintaining the equipment that is very needy equipment. And I think with that, we can transition to our Q&A and a bit of a live demo of the site to kind of go through, some of your questions. If we want to go back, if you had any specific things you wanted to look at, we'll go ahead and pull that site up and start answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nora. While she's going ahead and pulling up the actual live site right now to see some radar, I did first want to put up a poll as you guys are starting to think about questions to ask. We also have questions for you and how this could be used either by your locality, if you are a nonprofit organization joining us here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that, and then we can discuss actively the any responses or additional feedback. But Nora, as those are coming in, if you want to go over the radar, what's coming our way in the next couple of hours.
Yeah, be great. So I'm going to go to the dashboard because I feel like this is the best way to view it. And this is also what I've been playing around a little bit with this morning because we actually have some stuff that's happening coming in. So like I said, I'm going to zoom out. This automatically shows, this is NOAA's base mosaic reflectivity, I believe, base reflectivity mosaic. So that's what's currently on. But we also have a couple of options here. If we wanted to look at generic radar. And this is where you can turn on your legend for it as well, if my mouse worked properly. So that's that icon right there. Not all of them have that option. And like I said, it is a little bit small, so it is hard to tell, but it is a pretty cool to kind of see that weather coming in towards us. And let's see. Oh, there's a question in the chat about talking with the National Weather Service about COCO-RA's network. I have not talked to them about that network. We have been in communication with the National Weather Service and our contact at the office in Sterling, but that would be really interesting because that could be really cool. Again, if I don't know how much goes on in this region, but any more people that are measuring precipitation data, the more information we have, the better, I think.
Definitely. It looks like some people have been answering the poll. Nora, are you able to see the poll results as well as they're coming in, or is it just
probably I moved it out of the way to look at the oh no, it's just showing me the poll and that I cannot vote because I'm a panelist.
So just to share with folks, some things that are coming in, it looks like the majority do see themselves using the platform or data, which is great to hear. In some of the ways that there is interest in using the platform, everybody has said for public education and awareness, which is awesome. So if anybody would be interested or willing to raise their hand and come off mute and tell us some of the ways that you could foresee your organization or locality using this for education and outreach, that would be great. A number are also interested in safety alerts and warning system capabilities. And then a couple of folks each described it for research, planning and design of infrastructure, as well as environmental monitoring. So it looks like there's also some interest in other types of dashboards. So that's definitely something, as Nora mentioned, that we'll take into consideration. We want this to be as useful for you and your locality as possible. So I'll continue to keep this open. Looks like we had another question from Ann O'Neill, who asked, how can this also inform where green infrastructure is needed?
I think it's showing you where the rain is falling and the distribution. I think one of the most interesting things during like that storm that we had maybe just a couple of weeks ago up here, it actually really only hit where I lived in West Springfield. And, you know, a gauge will show like maybe a half an inch of rain came down in a very short period of time, and maybe just a couple miles away, nothing, right? And so we really want to look for patterns in that distribution to see if there really is anything, because maybe there are spaces that would be suited for green infrastructure better than typical gray infrastructure, to kind of help those systems, and again, helping us understand our general like rainfall runoff systems and how they're behaving.
Yeah, great question. Feel free to continue putting questions in the chat with the remaining couple of minutes we have. I think one question, Nora, I'm seeing we have a few of our Planning District Commission friends also on the call. So curious to hear and for you to share if you've seen a similar regional platform in other regions of the Commonwealth or even other areas of the US. And if not, what are maybe some considerations or lessons learned for other planning districts or entities interested in having a regional platform?
Well, the idea did actually come from North Carolina has one, the Flood Information Notification System. It's also a cooperative agreement with government agency USGS and a stormwater service. And then we also have Virginia has also been working really hard through VDEM to update their iFlows network, which is traditionally focused in Appalachia, you know, in those mountainous, really intense areas that are getting massive flash floods. And so that network is now open. They have all of their gauge information up. That's showing the rest of the state where they really needed to install a lot of sensors because they didn't have them. And then Texas as well has a really fantastic program and application that we also kind of looked at when we were looking at how to design one of these platforms. And to the second part of your question, I think it's that gauges are really expensive. So for one thing, it's an expensive undertaking. And so I think it's not like our localities are doing this lightly. They are responding to pretty intense impacts and financial and, you know, personal losses in order to, you know, address that by making these investments, right? And also maintenance. So I think that's where we could play the best coordinating role, is through either providing, you know, some sort of cooperative agreement and helping to fund continued maintenance, or helping to ensure that it will continue once a sensor is installed. But in order to get accurate information, they do need constant care and attention. So I think focus on maintenance is one of the most important things to think about.
Thank you. We'll wait another couple of minutes for any other questions to come in, but again, it's great to see so many participants here today. Maybe Nora, one further question to think about. You know, we are seeing certain areas in the region that lack regularly recorded precipitation data. So again, if you just want to talk a little bit further about opportunities through the dashboard and then next steps to potentially fill in those gaps as well. I think you mentioned potentially purchasing new rain gauges. So any areas that you might see that being worthwhile?
Yeah, we would love to add more kind of out in the western area. And we also know that there's some that we haven't even ingested into the system yet. But that was one of the results of the original audit that we had done with the first set of funds that we got, was looking at some recommendations for where some of those like large blank areas could be expanded, but specifically because of using GAR, you know, so where we could be optimally place these, you know, to get us more accurate information. So this is, I mean, that's the benefit of this platform, right? Was by making this information public and available to everyone, including all different planning agencies and groups, they are able to see. So if they are planning their own, they can look at it and see maybe they don't need to. So that was an example of how this, I think, has made an impact already. We were contacted by someone in Land Development Services in Fairfax County who said, this is great. we have inspectors who have to go out and look at construction sites every time it rains X amount in 24 hours. So I was able to get in touch with our Fairfax County person, and they are able to set up a threshold notification system so that the inspector gets a little notification every time it reaches that threshold, and they know they have to go inspect a site. And so again, like, the information sharing is the one, I think, making this information available to everyone is kind of the most valuable aspect of it, because that could have, previously been set up, but because they didn't know this capability existed until we made this public, wouldn't be able to do it.
Great, thank you. It looks like there aren't any further questions. Nora did have her email at the end of the presentation. Those slides will also be included on NVRC's webpage following the event. And again, this will be uploaded to NVRC's YouTube page shortly following. So we'll give it maybe like 10 more seconds. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.